Welcome back to the Cream City Club podcast. I am Spencer Michaelis. I'm here again with Gunnar Amelunk. Gunnar, how are we doing tonight?
I'm doing okay. I'm a little sad. I was gonna play the Michael Scott "It's Over, We're Screwed" clip, but I didn't want to get copyrighted today, so I'm not gonna do that. But that's kind of how my feelings are right now. But Spencer, how you doing?
I'm not quite to that point, but not my favorite day. Not my favorite day. All right, before we get all sad, we'll do that later. If you're listening and haven't yet subscribed, please take a moment to do so on whatever platform you are listening on and to rate us 5 stars. Follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod. We are running that giveaway still. We're getting very close. I think we're like 5 followers away from 100. So uh, be sure to take part in that. Hopefully by the next time we record, we can do our drawing. Um, and yeah, just stay up to date on the episode releases at that Twitter account as well. And then obviously with today being the NBA trade deadline, this is going to be a Bucks focused episode.
And then tonight, of course, as Spencer said, we did have the trade deadline today, so we're gonna be going over those Bucks moves that we did make, and then we'll be addressing obviously sort of the elephant in the room of the trades that maybe didn't happen and the guys that are still wearing Bucks jerseys today that maybe we thought weren't going to be wearing them tonight. And then all those moves mean for us going forward this season and just in the future, even past this season. So we'll be covering all of those aspects. But first, Spencer, I think we just got to jump into the guy that we did acquire in this trade deadline, and that is Patrick Beverley. So we got him from the 76ers. The Bucks gave up Cameron Payne, and we also gave up our 2027 second round pick. And then, of course, we got Patrick Beverley. So let's just start out with the simple question here, Spencer. Did you like this move? And kind of what do you think and what do you expect him to bring? Maybe as far as even something that we lack, what does he bring differently than kind of what Campaign was bringing for us?
Yeah. So to start it off, I mean, I do like this move. I think this is very, very low risk. And really, I like it for the reason that he does bring something that we lack badly, and that's point of attack defense, the ability to guard guards on the perimeter. And honestly, with his strength, you don't want him guarding a wing for long periods of time, but he's a guy that can be out there when you're switching and stuff because he's strong enough to handle that type of a post up from a wing or even fronting a big, and you just know he's going to bring effort time in and time out. You're never going to have him in any of these lapses that we seem to find the Bucks getting caught in a lot this year. Um, Offensively, I think I don't want to compare him to PJ Tucker because I do think he's more capable on offense than what PJ is, but the goal would be still for him to not be super involved. He takes and makes open shots. He's a capable ball handler. He's not somebody you want handling the ball too often, but for a couple minutes stints when Dame's out or when Giannis needs a breather while Dame's out, whatever, he's fine to bring up the ball and get the offense started. Like you can trust him to do that. Um, for me, it's just I really like the idea of somebody who plays with a chip on his shoulder and is somebody who's constantly working on defense and cares about defense and makes that a very big point of emphasis. The Bucks, I mean, Ajax is probably the one guy who fits that description right now on the team, and he's still we're working through some things with Ajax, and I'm not sure how many minutes he'll be getting under Doc. So for me, this was just a really, really important addition. In some way, you needed to add somebody who could guard on the perimeter, and Beverly's been doing it for a long time, and at this he hasn't really fallen off on that end. I think the offense comes and goes, but defense is still pretty good, and he was doing well for the Sixers in his role this year. And if he can continue that same type of production here, I would feel pretty good about what we got. How about you, Gunnar? I know we might have some differing opinions on Patrick Beverly.
We'll save that for the end of this section if we start fighting here. But no, I mean, I agree with everything you said too. And I was going to say that he did have a rough start to this season, but definitely recently he's for sure picked it up even on the offensive end, even though I don't want him to be a volume guy in that end is he's just kind of doing his job, which is good to see. But I think starting with kind of what we gave up even, I know we're not going to give Cameron Payne a huge section, but I think at the very least this move is a plus because if you listen to this podcast, you know that I'm not a huge campaign fan, and I didn't think that he's necessarily a playoff player. I think we've seen it in stretches, even when we played him in the finals. I think he was in some of those games a little bit, but not a guy you can kind of rely on in the playoffs. And I think there is at least a slight chance that Pat Bev could give us some minutes in the playoffs. So, especially on this roster, I mean, we don't really have a guy like him. So, as far as like point of attack defense, which I think his nickname actually is Mr. 94 feet in on Twitter. So, I don't necessarily want him to do that, but if that's his confidence level, sure, I guess we'll take it. But yeah, I mean, not a reliable shooter, I would say, but I would kind of trust him if he had an open shot. I would definitely want him to take it. But I think his volume obviously is way down to even when he was like in his prime, which that was always kind of what scared me even back then. I think he was sort of like that. I forgot the word for it now. I had it in my head, but the guy who irrational confidence type of guy where he's shooting like he kind of thinks of himself more than what he is, and he's just because he has so much confidence, he's just going to shoot it. But I think he's a little bit smarter now. But I think the biggest thing here too is probably that leadership aspect is kind of what we're lacking. And you brought up PJ Tucker. This is kind of, I'm not saying this to fight, but this is probably where we're gonna. It's a fine line here of what he kind of walks on as far as the toughness that he brings and sort of the mental side. But I think even at his worst, it's something that we're for sure lacking. Whatever he's going to bring is going to be a positive because we do need that kind of jolt. And that's kind of what PJ Tucker brought was that jolt of kind of toughness and just mental toughness in general. I mean, his famous quote, like in the championship run, like "be a dog for us." And he's like, "Well, we got dogs." I just kind of had to wake him up a little bit. So hopefully he can wake up our guys and we can kind of get that toughness back. But as far as the player, yeah, I mean that's kind of what I'm looking at there, and I'm not expecting a ton, but I think it is a plus, at least in the backup point guard, backup guard category. I'll take it. But um, kind of moving on here, there's obviously that history between him and Doc. That history was good history, him with the Clippers, and there's also some bad history here with him and Dame. So do you think those sides of the pendulum, do you think that kind of holds any weight? Um, I think he did have a quote where he said that he's got to work through some things here with Dame, which I'm sure he will. But do you think either of those things, good or bad, do you think are kind of notable here?
Um, I think the good history with Doc is a lot more notable than the bad with Dame. I will say this. If you can come up with examples to prove me wrong, I'm happy to. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any player who's ever not enjoyed being a teammate with Beverley, or at least said anything publicly about being not enjoying playing with Beverley. Plenty of players don't like playing against him, and there's a reason for that. And some of it's probably a little borderline on whether it's clean or a little dirty, or if he gets a little down into the dirt where he's maybe being a little cheap at times. But I don't think I've ever heard of anybody who didn't like him as a teammate and didn't respect him as a teammate. Dame and him had issues because they went at each other. I don't think that's that uncommon. Bev talks. He's gonna talk. He's gonna talk a lot when he's on the court. And like you said, some of that can be overboard and it can cost you. And he might get us a tech in a spot where we don't want a tech. We saw that with PJ though too. PJ was going out and jaw jacking with KD while KD was putting up 60 on him, and it was still like it got everybody pumped up and it kept everybody engaged in the game. So for me, I'm not worried about the Dame part of it. In some ways, I'm actually a little more worried about the good history between him and Doc, in that I could see Doc playing him more minutes than he should play. Um, Now, to me, I do think Beverly's a playoff player. I think he's more of a playoff player than decent chunk of what we have in the rotation right now. The defense being the big reason for that. I don't think you can have Beasley and Dame on the court very often together in the playoffs. I think they're just going to get torched against any team with guards. I think you could have Dame and Beverly on the court for a decent amount of time together and you could get by. Obviously, in that case, Dame is running offense. Bev is just spotting up and trying to hopefully make open shots. But Bev is taking the best guard on the other team, and he's taking care of that side of the ball on defense. We've talked about it before. I think Dame is a better and more capable defender than he has shown throughout the season. I think there's a pretty good chance you see it step up later in the season and into the playoffs because he is more engaged and he's got more reason to be. But you still need somebody out there who can guard and can actually do it consistently. Pat Bev can do that. Now, he's older. I think he's 36 now, I want to say. So
35.
35.
He
Okay.
turns 36 after the year.
Okay. Long stints with him are probably when you're going to start seeing him. I mean, he's going to get tired throughout the course of a really long stint in the game. I was actually watching a Sixers game few weeks ago they were down Maxey, they were down a bunch of guys. It was against the Nuggets. It was in Denver. Um, they were down Embiid. They were down pretty much everybody. They just started a group of basically what the Bucks have been starting the last few games, but not even a Giannis. And Beverley played like 35 minutes and guarded Jamal Murray pretty much the whole time. And honestly, in Denver, in altitude where he hadn't really been playing this many minutes, and he was able to hold up pretty well. Now he was shooting really well. He was scoring at a really high rate in that game. And then at the end of the game, he was dead and he missed a bunch of shots short. Um, but I'm curious. I'm very curious to see how it works out if he gets more minutes. I honestly, I would not be. I'm not predicting this, but I'm saying I wouldn't be shocked if he starts um, in Beasley's spot at some point down the stretch here, where he takes over that starting spot. And I, I think they have to have somebody in that spot where Beasley comes off the bench and is in a scoring role. If we're recording this as the Timberwolves game is wrapping up, Beasley in a scoring role doesn't sound great after this game because that dude couldn't make anything tonight. But I do think him in that role is a lot better for him. I think a really low usage player who can defend next to Dame is something we've been talking about all year. Bev fits that. And is it the most ideal situation? No. But on this roster, I think it might be. So, um, yeah, Gunnar, what are your thoughts on? I know you were, I think, a little more worried about the Dame history. But what are your thoughts on that and the Doc thing overall?
Yeah, it's I kind of listed out here. It's more of a joke, kind of a not a joke, but I do think Dame's kind of been dealt a bad hand, I feel like here, and it's just kind of all worked out this way this season. I just think he has had a rough season, not even the Bucks' fault, not any, really anybody's fault. It's just kind of been unfortunate sort of events. Um, I mean, I did list it out kind of as again a joke, kind of this laying out all the problems that he's had this year, but obviously we know the personal life problems with Dame, and then which is just awful. And of course, you can't ever predict that could happen anywhere where he's in life. That just sucks. Um, but again, dealt a bad hand there. And then you look at kind of the coaching change. He loses his assistant coach, Terry Stotts, right away. It seemed like that was going to be easy, nice fit for him. Loses him. Another coaching change with their head coach. And then obviously he's just kind of been off his game this season on top of it. And then it's just been a weird fit trying to figure it out. Um, Not really his fault there, but we know why that was the case. And then this last thing, I kind of joked with you. I sent you a text. I said, in kind of jokingly, what John Horst said, like, "Hey, how do we make Dame's season worse? Who's that one guy he hates in the NBA? Let's just grab him to let's make his life easier." But no, I do think they'll work it out. I'm not that concerned with that part of it, but it is just kind of disappointing that it's funny in a way that this kind of ended up being the reason if people actually knew what, again, we fight about a lot of stuff off camera. It was the beginning of this season. I think you kind of circled a guy like Pat Bev to be like our backup point guard. And I'm like, no, this guy cannot play. Like he's not going to be, there's a reason why he's kind of fighting for a minimum contract. Um, and I mean, at that point, we're kind of looking for scraps. And then we ended up having campaign just fall right into our lap, which was nice. But um, I remember sending you like box scores of like Pat Bev, and he was shooting like 25% to start the year, and I'm like, see, I told you. And then now he's doing good, but um, I don't think that history is going to be that big of a problem or anything like that, though. As far as with him and Dame, I do think, like you said, though, with him and Doc having that relationship and knowing that's kind of what we need on the defensive end, I could totally see him starting. Um, and I mean, we're not going to talk about these last couple of games, and we're recording this right after the Bucks just got smoked by the Timberwolves, so. Um, we're starting to see some of those younger guys. Maybe Ajax, obviously, he got to play today. Maybe he gets sort of that quote unquote backup ball handler roles. I don't know. We can figure it out, but I could totally see him starting. But just to kind of wrap up this Pat Bev, I don't know if we were going to fight about this Spencer or not, but I did kind of save a section for us to fight about Patrick Beverley. But yeah, I mean, did you have any lasting thoughts on Patrick Beverley? Because I know he had obviously an interview today where he broke his own trade, which was cool. Um, and I guess I can lead off since I'm the one with the problem sometimes with Patrick Beverley. I think I spoke about the irrational confidence part of him, which again I said fine line because I think one, that's kind of what we need on this team. So it's actually kind of worked out perfectly to where we're literally lacking that type of guy again. So even if he is too much, like I said, it kind of unfortunately on this roster worked out to where we do need a guy like that. So I don't know if there's going to be a too far because I think we might just need it. But in general, I think he kind of rubs me a little bit the wrong way when he talks sometimes about himself. I think he kind of thinks of himself as the dude, which again, fine line. That's awesome to think like that. But um, I'm just a little bit scared that he might not know his role a little bit. And I know he talked about in that podcast, I don't know if you listened to it, it's only like 30 minutes, but him like liking Doc and stuff. And he was like, "Yeah, me and Doc are like kind of cut from the same cloth. Like, he knows like he'll let me be me." And he's like, "They traded me for campaign. Like I'm gonna be getting minutes." And it's like we campaign was barely getting minutes. What are you talking about? But again, like it's cool to have that confidence. I don't know. I think I compared it. This to be my last note. I kind of compared it to Corbin Burns a little bit, to where I think he's kind of got that same type of thing where it's almost like, and you mentioned the teammates too, which I actually had that highlighted. I was gonna say I don't think he's actually had one bad teammate interaction, which is kind of funny for how much I've complained you think he would have, but it's always like opponents. So maybe that is something like that. I get scared of those like Corbin Burns types of like locker room stuff, and I don't know, but I guess what did you want to speak to him since you've been the Patrick Beverley fan for a while? I do think I'm, again, because of this team, I think I'm more lenient than I probably would have been if this happened like last year. I'd have been like, no, I don't want this on my team right now. I can't deal with this. But I think because we're literally so severely lacking in this category, I maybe this will be a jolt for us. I'm just trying to be positive, but yeah, what do you got?
So for me, I've always been a fan of players like Patrick Beverley. And part of it is because when I played basketball, I was a little short, scrappy dude who like that was my job when I got into games was to just annoy people. And I didn't talk like these guys. Like you know me, I don't talk much in sports in general. I'm more of a do things and let my play speak for me. But when I would get in, I mean that was my thing. I shot open threes and I played really, really hard on defense to the point where I would annoy people. Like I got multiple people thrown out of middle school games for like pushing me down because I had annoyed them so much. But I didn't say a word to them. I just was playing hard. And those types of guys always have just kind of like I hate to say it, and Bucks fans might hate me for it, but I have always loved Marcus Smart. And he annoys me at times because that's his job. His job is to annoy the other team and to annoy, and the fan base is part of that, obviously.
That's a good
And that's
example because I also hated Marcus Smart, but then I was also kind of entertaining those trade offers this season because I'm like, that's just kind of what we need.
right. And it's just like to me that is what their job is. Their job is to annoy everybody except their team. And like I said, and like you just talked about, I just don't think there's ever been an issue with him with his own team. And while I think there is absolutely an irrational confidence to him, I also think that's how somebody with less talent than a lot of players in the league is able to stick around, is because he's able to talk his way up into believing that he can stop these guys who are absolutely more talented than him. But he can convince himself that he's capable of doing it, and that he just puts so much effort and heart into doing it that he actually can control them pretty well on that end. The confidence more definitely worries me more on the offensive end. Like you said, like I think there is a capability of Doc saying, "Hey, just be yourself," and him thinking, "Okay, well if I'm getting shot, like myself is getting shots and doing all this stuff, like that concerns me a little bit." Um, but honestly, the bench can't score anyway for the Bucks right now, and he has shown to be capable of at least, like I said, in that Denver game, he had like 20 some, I think almost in the first half or like right after halftime. Like he's had outbursts when he's on the court for a long time. I don't want him to do that, but I do know that he's at least capable of doing that on certain nights. Um, to me, I could see it. I don't think he'll shoot quite as good, quite as well as Javon did last year, but I could see it being kind of that type of scoring output where certain games he's going to score like 3, 4 points. Certain games he might put up like 10 or 12. And then if Dame's out for a game, you could maybe see like a 20-point game in there mixed in because he played a bunch more minutes and had the ball a lot more. I'm not expecting that type of production consistently, but I think he's a capable offensive player, a lot more than like a PJ was when he was with the Bucks. And I really do think it's the guard version of PJ on almost everything else, where he's gonna annoy the other team. He's probably gonna get some techs. He's going to play really, really hard on defense, and he might be able to bring a little bit of a different edge to the team in general. Like, like we did already talk about it, but I just think if he can get everyone else to kind of buy in a little bit. There's I could see Beasley being a lot better defender for stints, like we've talked about, when he's completely energized and playing hard. And if he's playing less because of Beverley, that might be easier for him. Um, if he can get Dame to buy in on that end in the playoffs a little bit more, like then it becomes a lot easier for everyone else to play on that side of the ball. Because frankly, I gotta say, Chris has been obviously we got to see what happens with this ankle. And while we're recording this, obviously we're the Suns game was the game before the one we just finished up, and Chris got hurt, and we aren't really exactly sure what's going on with that. But I thought he was playing really, really well on defense for like the last 3 or 4 weeks leading into that injury. And he's been really good on offense. So hopefully he comes back healthy. But I feel really good about the 3 through 5, especially in Doc's version of the defense. The bench defense is concerning, and the guard defense was very concerning. I think we at least solved parts of both of those with this trade. So I don't know. I think in the end, because he fits this team better, we're probably not going to disagree as much on this as we might have, like you said, at another point. Um, but like to me, it's just the matter of I've always liked guys like this, so that's why it's part of me. Like I can see why, or I like to think I see the value in them a little bit more than other people just because it was how I tried to play when I was playing. So I don't know if you got anything else on that or
No, I just like you said, I didn't want to get too personal on him because I will be not rooting for him on the Bucks, so I don't want to ever have a now that we are like we're on audio now talking, and so my take's going to be living on the internet forever. So I don't want him to come back and make fun of me at
I
some
can
point
screenshot your
because
texts. I don't
yeah. Well, then you're just a rat at that point for putting that on Twitter. But um, no, like I said, I'm trying to be positive and I will root for him. But maybe it's more fun when he's on my team. I guess that's kind of how I wanted to end it. Where I didn't. He's just one of those guys that, like you said with Dame, like that's when he's on the other team, like he annoys the crap out of him. So maybe Dame will respect it if he's on his team. I always had that clip in my head that I should have mentioned it at the Dame part, but. I think he was part of that when Dame missed a couple free throws in the bubble and he was like laughing on the bench and Dame's like, "Didn't I send you guys home?" Which I know Pat Bev wasn't even on that team. That was the Thunder team with like Paul George, but he's like, "Didn't I just send you guys home?" Like um so that's the kind of stuff that annoys me where it's like I don't know if he could be talking, but again, he's on my team now, so I will enjoy it. But
yeah.
I think one thing, did you have another thing in that or
Well, I was just going to talk. I forgot about this earlier, but did you see the Chris Haynes tweet about Dame's comment on Pat Bev?
no?
Okay, he just said, "First, I want to say I'm sad to see campaign go. We developed a friendship that I cherish. As for Pat, he brings an edge and a defensive tenacity on the perimeter that we need. There are not many players who bring it on a nightly basis like him. I look forward to working together. Our past personal issues don't trump an opportunity to win a championship."
Hmm.
So
Right.
that's at least a good start.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, we have now Pat Beverley on video too saying that as well. So they know the goal at the very least. So and they're professionals, like you said. I think they both want a championship. They both don't have a championship actually for sure. So
Yep.
they're kind of in the same boat in that aspect. So they're both hungry. But I think one thing I wanted to end on this sort of topic too is we did have obviously that 2024 second round pick from the Blazers that we talked about, and we were in a way able to avoid using it, which we did avoid using it, but we were kind of hoping that something else would happen with it. But we did keep that one. So remember that to have that in your back pocket, maybe for this summer and that draft night or whatever. We'll talk about that sort of opportunity later. But just remember that now we do have that asset to trade as well because we traded kind of the really our two. I mean, it depends how you rate Marjan Beauchamp or something like that. Or obviously, we traded the next guy I'm about to talk about, Robin Lopez. But of the guys that we thought were going to get traded with kind of a little value, we this trade we gave up literally our least valuable package to get a guy who maybe can help us. So it's just kind of a win-win. You just kind of hope that it's more than just on the margins. You hope that it actually is kind of impactful. But
Yeah.
just sliding in here with the other trade that we made. Um, man, I just kind of want to start out with a little bit of a morning here for our good friend Robin Lopez. I kind of listed out some positives and negatives here. I think positive first. Bango can kind of take a sigh of relief. He's now safe and doesn't have to worry about Robin, although he was on the bench and the sidelines today reading a book. So maybe he's always going to be watching from the rafters in Pfizer. Uh, but next, of course, we discovered that Robbins is maybe he might be NBA paint too, by the way. I'm just gonna throw that out there, but we discovered that he's a great shoe painter and he's had some really cool designs that recently we've been able to see him on the court. So it was a great farewell for him, but we will be missing those, at least the Bucks custom versions of those. I'm sure he's gonna keep doing it. And then really lastly, you gotta wonder if Brook Lopez will even miss him. I kind of put that as undecided. I'm not really sure if he's going to miss him or not. He sounds like he doesn't really love his brother sometimes, but I'm sure it sucks losing your brother on the team. So, but no, going into the serious questions here, we with this trade, obviously we freed up just a roster spot. So, do you see us getting a buyout guy with this roster spot? And if so, I mean, who do you like that's out there right now? And just kind of a caveat for people who don't know, because the Bucks are over that first apron, we can only bring in guys who are less than the full mid level. So that's about what 11 million ish
Like
somewhere.
12.5, yeah.
Yeah. So anybody below that who didn't sign for that, we can go and acquire, which definitely shortens up that list a little bit. But Spencer, did you have anybody who that you liked at that point?
That really, really shortens up the list. Daniel House is the only name I've seen come out so far that seems of any interest to me that we would be able to get. Um, I think honestly, no. For me, he's pretty much the only guy I've seen come out that I would have any interest in. I wanted us to sign him like a couple of years ago in free agency when he was probably going to be going for like the taxpayer mid level. Um, I think he actually signed with Doc and the Sixers at that time, if I'm not wrong. So that I kind of just put together. So I wonder if there is some mutual interest there between the two
Hmm.
teams. Um, you can give your guys if you want, but to me, I'm gonna go ahead and my prediction is that they don't fill that last roster spot. But we'll talk about why in a second.
Yeah, that's exactly my prediction too. But I had that name, and then obviously I think Killian Hayes makes a little sense. It's just he probably wants a bigger opportunity to kind of get himself paid maybe a little bit or kind of just give himself an opportunity. I don't know if this is necessarily a spot where you're going to get your, a shine a little bit. I mean, even if he kind of cracks the rotation slightly, it's not going to be kind of a spot where you can showcase yourself now. And we don't really have a ton of time to make maybe try to make that work. We already can barely get Marjan into games, and we're just starting to see Andre and AJ crack the rotation. I don't think we need to get another guy in the mix who is kind of in that same boat. I think one broke before um, we recorded here, Gallinari, who I don't want, but that's just another name that I think he's cheaper than the $11 million
Yeah.
dollars. So at that point, you're kind of like another old guy who can't really play defense and maybe can score. If you think the bench scoring is a problem, maybe you take a flyer and he's like a Jeff Teague if you need to make the playoffs. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, I wasn't super crazy about any of those names. Um, but moving on, as we said, we got to break down this part of it a little bit. So with this trade, this we kind of got to do some finagling here, and this is a little bit of wait and see. But right now, for as it is, it seems like with this trade, we were able to squeak under that second apron. That's kind of in accordance to what happens with Chris Middleton's contract if he's going to have those unlikely bonuses that are going to kind of well, they're not likely to kick in. So if they don't kick in, then we're going to be able to sit under that tax, which is huge. So keeping that in mind, Spencer, what do you think that means kind of for this offseason? What kind of doors does that open up now? As you said, if we don't pick somebody up, is it worth? Obviously, it seems like it's worth not to pick somebody up, but sort of why? Why? What does that mean for our future?
Yeah, so I think the main thing for me now is that the only reason the Bucks should pick somebody up is if somebody out of nowhere gets bought out that you would have not expected to be out there and is a legitimate, like, okay, we're going to sign him and he's going to be a rotation player immediately and he can help our team for sure. Otherwise, they shouldn't sign anybody. And the reason is because if they stay under that second apron, we talked about this on previous pods, they are able to combine salaries for about a week and a half after before the new year starts, but for about a week and a half, including the draft, they would be able to combine Pat and Bobby and anybody else's salaries that they want to combine in a trade. And the big reason that matters so much is that some people are probably thinking, well, that'll be the same situation they were in today when they couldn't find anything of value. Difference is on draft night this year, the Bucks will be able to trade two picks. They'll be able to trade the pick that they'd be using that night and their 2031 pick becomes available at that time as well. So they would be able to combine salaries and have two first round picks and have that early second round pick from the Blazers that we talked about being able to keep. In that case, that is a lot more enticing package to a team that you could add a legitimate player for that type of package. Um, my my issue with doing what they did, and obviously we haven't really talked about, we'll talk about that in a second, but obviously that doesn't help you this year. And this is the window is small. The Damian Lillard window is not very big. So I would have rather been able to combine these contracts now. But I do think that like I said, that the overall offer the Bucks can make will be way better on draft night than it would have been today. So that means next year's ceiling could be raised significantly if they're able to put this all together. Now, with Middleton's unlikely quote unquote contract bonuses, I'm gonna guess that one of them is probably like winning the finals. That's what Drew's was a couple years ago. Um, Drew's contract bonus actually put the Bucks into the tax and started their clock on the luxury tax, the repeater tax, uh, earlier than they were expecting to. I think because they won the finals, he crossed them over into the luxury tax. But I think they would make that trade off any day. If that's the same case with Chris, then obviously they're going to make that trade off if that's what happens. But um, I'll be very curious to know what they actually are. I'm wondering if some of them are like games played, because for his case, with how many he's missed the last couple of years, unlikely bonuses could count as something like 70 games played, which I don't think he's gonna hit. Um, so I really don't we don't know. I'm sure somebody knows out there. A Bobby Marks or somebody like that is able to tell us what the unlikely bonuses are, but that's the main reason. I mean, you have the opportunity now during the draft to make a legitimate trade, one more legitimate trade before you are completely out of trade assets. I mean, this would be the last chance. And if they don't do it at that draft, then they are going to be this team for a while, probably without just swapping bodies at the same amount of money. So, um, Gunnar, I don't know. We could kind of tie this into what we were going to talk about next with all these with the two guys that we've been naming in all of our possible trades for the last month and a half. But um, do you think this is worth the trade-off of keeping Bobby and Pat this year in order to possibly get a much better player, not a much better player for them in June?
Yeah, well, one, it's a little bit of TBD because right now, as I'm sitting here right now, I guess I don't want to have a safe answer. Right now, I don't think that was at all worth it. Um, we've seen this team now for an extended period of time. I didn't necessarily get worked up for like getting like a DeJounte Murray right now, but I definitely got worked up to the possibility of this, like we talked about it, addition by subtraction. Like we're gonna get a body in here that can actually be a little bit more valuable than what we're getting out of Pat and Bobby. Um, so it just felt like we just needed that, and we could get a jolt off of just doing that alone. Um, and like you said, Dame's clock is on, so I just think it's a totally different time frame than what you normally would have did. I think if he would have did this with maybe like a Drew Holiday roster, that never happened, and then you kind of been like, well, now we can go get like a DeJounte Murray next summer, but we can also have a chance to win this year. It's just like, okay, I guess that makes a slightly bit of sense, but I've talked about it on past podcasts too of the thinking, and it seemed like that was the thinking when we got Doc Rivers was what is the best opportunity to win the championship this season? How do we win the championship this season? How like whatever we have to do, how can we get to that point? The best chance, chips all on the table. How are we going to do that this season? Because you never know what's guaranteed in the future and everything like that. I mean, Dame's a smaller point guard too. He hasn't had injury problems necessarily like crazy like that, but I don't want to necessarily bet on like older Dame and like we're gonna get all these chances. I love Dame, but I wanted to actually attack the opportunity that we have, rather than just kind of being like, well, we got like a decent chance this year, then hopefully next year where all the chips are in the perfect spot. So, um, I guess yeah, I mean we can wrap it into this next part, but I was just super disappointed in today's kind of moves, or lack thereof. But um, I think obviously they didn't have sort of a significant trade to make, but like I said, I think just sort of getting a body that was more of a positive on the floor for us rather than just what we just witnessed tonight again. So I mean, Pat played better tonight, but Bobby was Bobby. So, you're just kind of betting on what we saw in 2021 from those guys, and maybe it happens and maybe it doesn't. But kind of leading into my question here first for this what didn't happen part of the segment here was obviously we had those two guys who didn't change jerseys that we expected. Were you just what was your reaction today? Were you surprised that maybe one or not both of them were traded today or they weren't traded today? Or what was your kind of reaction to that? And were you disappointed, I guess?
Um, yeah, I was definitely disappointed. I expected at least one of them to, and I guess if I expected them, then I would have to say I was surprised as well. I guess thinking about it more, I did start thinking to myself like every other team's gotten a chance to watch these guys too, and if you've watched them much this year, it would be hard for me to understand how you see them as valuable basketball players. Um, the issue with what the Bucks wanted, and I will say this, and I didn't really think about it too much in the moment. All the names that the Bucks were tied to, only Royce O'Neal and Grant Williams moved. And Grant Williams was moved as part of a PJ Washington trade. The Bucks couldn't come close to matching that type of possible return for the Mavericks. And Royce O'Neal got 3 second-round picks for the Nets, and the Bucks literally don't even have 3 second-round picks that are tradable. And I believe the expiring deals went to the Nets instead of Bobby and Pat both have multiple years left on their deal, which we didn't really talk about that at any point, but that couldn't have made them much. That had to hurt their value too. I mean, teams don't want a lot of times teams will take on a bad contract because it's expiring at the end of the year and it matches the salary and they don't have to worry about it anymore. Those two are not, that's not the case for those two. Now in the offseason, I believe at least Pat would be on his last year next year, right? I'm not even sure. We might have to check that.
He might have another year even after that, I'm pretty sure, or an option at least. I'll
So
look while
I'm
you're talking.
yeah. So for me, I I viewed at the very least, I viewed Bobby as addition by subtraction. We've seen Pat have playoff. In fact, even when I really didn't like Pat early in his Buck stint, he actually played well in like that Boston series. Like he's had some pretty good playoff runs and series. Bobby has really not. Did you find what their contracts are?
Yeah, Pat's got next year, then he's got a player option, which I assume he'll be picking up
He
because
will
he's
be
probably
taking
won't be
that,
that good.
yes. He will be taking that. But yeah, I mean, I know a lot of Bucks fans. When I say stuff about Bobby, I always get at least a couple people who are like, he brings something we don't have, and I'm like, no, he doesn't. He doesn't. The Bobby chants have turned him into a completely different person than what or player than what Bucks fans think he is. And like to me, it's fun. I will always love what Bobby has brought and the fact that it's hard not to like a fan favorite here and somebody who plays to the crowd and genuinely appreciates Milwaukee and their fans. But he has done a very good job of making me not appreciate those things this year, especially. Like I have such a hard time watching him play basketball. It's unbelievable. He is way too big to have absolutely no ability to defend at the rim. Way too big. He is a much worse shooter than he was during that championship run. His release has gotten, I don't even know if it's slower, but it's a lot lower. So it's a lot easier to contest and to block. I mean, we saw it multiple times today, even when we were watching the game. Like he had tons of space, but he has to do that slow step in and then a slow release. He got blocked once. He might have got blocked twice. And then he wasn't able to get it off a couple times and had to try and split like the defenders that were closing out, which you don't want him doing either. The defense is unplayable. Like he can't play in the playoffs. And this isn't a new thing. He couldn't play in that Nets series in 2021. He didn't play. Bud made a very good call in that scenario and said, nope, Bobby's out of the rotation. That was the correct move. He could not play in that series. He wouldn't have played that much in the Hawks series if Giannis didn't get hurt. And then the Sun series, like that was an awesome game 6. Definitely appreciate that. He had a pretty solid like game 5. But if he's not making shots, even at that time, you couldn't play him. He just happened to make shots during that stretch. Now, even when he's making shots, I don't feel good about him being on the court. I think he just immediately cancels it out on the other end. Um, I would have taken almost anything for him. And Pat wouldn't have been that far behind, but I just think that Pat has a better track record of being like a 16 game type player and somebody that I would trust a little bit more in that setting. It was nice to see him dunk today. I'll say that. Show a little bit more of the athleticism again, because that seems like what's really changed with him. I texted you the other day, like Pat's shooting splits look fine. And if you told me he was shooting like 44% and 37 from three before the season, I would have been like, cool. That's probably a pretty solid season for Pat, but everything else has fallen off. And if he can just get back a little bit, I mean, the defense was not good today, frankly, but he was also being asked to guard like Mike Conley. He can't guard a point guard on the perimeter, but he can at least hang a little bit more with like wings. I don't know. It's surprised and disappointed are definitely two of the main words I would have used to describe it. So I know you're in the same boat, but Gunnar, what were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you brought up some good points. I think first with the Bobby thing, the player wise, I think I understand maybe I still agree with your thinking. I'm not even disagreeing, but I think I maybe understand it a little bit more because I think he does have more value than Pat and being a quote unquote big that doesn't play like one. But I think maybe there's probably a little bit of nervousness of like, okay, if we don't have him, which again, he doesn't do anything as a big on defense, but if you do kind of get rid of him, let's say it was like him for Grant Williams. I think in the playoffs that kind of works, but then how do you survive throughout the rest of the season? I can kind of see that thinking a little bit of like, okay, what's our backup plan to cover that? And like the value, like I said, I hate him as a player right now, but I can kind of see where you're kind of protective of that asset a little bit. Kind of like the Dante talk again. We've alluded to it a couple times how we thought about that. Like I understand Dante had a horrible season, but it kind of felt like bad asset management a little bit, where it's like you kind of traded him at the worst point, and you could have kept him, and you could have just traded him down the line, blah blah blah, whatever. But that's kind of get that same sort of vibe here. Maybe we're kind of scared of making that type of irrational mistake again, even though I don't think it was even that type of scenario. But I think you mentioned how people say that Bobby does break something that we don't have. Maybe we're misreading that quote because he does bring something that we don't have. A horrible backup center. He brings that every night. But and it kind of lastly too to mention your points. And I don't think I've actually gotten this take off on the podcast, but you mentioned Bud. I think what kind of goes gets lost in a lot of that stuff, and you mentioned how Bud would like bench him. Bud also got probably the most out of Bobby Portis because she would lay into him. I remember being even at games, and I hate being that guy of like you had to be there, but like he would light Bobby up on the bench, like not be afraid at all to get in his face, throw a clipboard at him, run out in the court what they call timeouts. Like he was getting everything he could out of Bobby. And it took that much, and you kind of like squeeze the orange a little bit. You can kind of get something out of him, to sort of make it work. And I think him being a little bit more lenient and I'm not going to blame the coaching, I guess. I'll be positive, but I just think him kind of being able to freelance a little bit more is not necessarily good for him, and maybe Doc will change that. I'll also say give him some credit. He was one of the first sparks this season in that bubble or whatever I'm calling it the bubble. It felt like the bubble, the in-season tournament. And he kind of did like Griffin up and it's like, hey, you got to coach this better. Like this is kind of getting ridiculous. And it's like, well, you got to play better, buddy, too. But at least he kind of had that spark and that voice. So maybe he can bring that and kind of combine with Pat Bev. I can sort of see that kind of aspect too. So I'm trying to be positive now. This is our team now, Spencer. So if we got to lock in at some point here and try to find a niche here till we can make it work. So I think if Doc can sort of get behind Bobby a little bit and really challenge him, kind of like Bud did, because he's going to have to. And I think in the playoffs, it won't be as we don't necessarily will have to play him all the time in the playoffs. I mean, you're gonna need something from Pat now. I think Pat's gonna be even more big because you got to have a guy who can kind of play the four a little bit. We have Jay Crowder now too. If you kind of compare it to that championship season, I think those guys can kind of cover the small ball four. You're relying a ton on Giannis as like a five at that point, but in those crunch time lineups, it's gonna be huge to try to figure out who is those five guys now. So, um, I think we kind of talked about what it means for the season, but I think I kind of went there more than you did. What do you think? What do you need out of Bobby and Pat? I'll just leave this question for you, really for the rest of the regular season, but how are they going to crack the rotation to be valuable for us in the playoffs?
I just don't know how Bobby does unless he can suddenly find some sort of basketball IQ on the defensive end where to me he's a guy who should honestly be like trying to take charges and stuff because he clearly cannot contest when guys just run right through him at the rim and he just lets them do it. Like stuff like that is probably a way he could find his way into being serviceable on defense by just stepping in, taking a few charges. Um, maybe it is just taking a couple fouls sometimes at the rim instead of just being a turnstile. Like he's he pretty much just smacks at the ball and ends up giving up and ones instead of, you know, wrapping them up or something. Like even if it's just as simple as that for like 5 to 10 minute stints, not stints, 5 to 10 minutes a game in the playoffs, um, then I could see that being somewhat helpful if he's making shots. He has to do something on defense while making shots, or I just don't think he can play. I really don't. And for Pat, I think it is like he's got to make open threes. Like I think he has been for a little while here because he started the season really slow shooting, but he's up to the upper 30s in 3-point percentage, so he must be on a pretty good run for a while now. Um, but like I was touching on there, I think he's got to show a little bit more of that burst that we saw in that championship run. And Pat's known as being one of the best athletes in the NBA, but he doesn't look like it this year at all. We saw the dunk today. I think we've seen him getting up a little bit more and challenging at the rim a little bit more.
I didn't want to cut you off before, but I think that was I saw a stat where he didn't even dunk once this year before that dunk tonight. I'm pretty
Really,
sure. Yeah,
w
so
wouldn't
maybe
shock
that
me.
was a joke, but I actually, like I said, I wouldn't actually be shocked either because I can't even remember him dunking. Like that's how much his athleticism kind of fallen off.
Yeah, I mean, if you think back to when he started here, he was like second behind Giannis on dunks or in like on the team in dunks. And he wasn't playing that much at that point either. He pretty much dunked any time he was down low. I think he's got to find some of that burst. He's got to find, I think he's still bounce wise has it, but he can't get himself into the position that he needs to be able to get up and dunk as much. I think the quickness is a little bit more what's gone for him. Um, he's got to be able to stay down. There's times where a flyby contest makes sense and you want to just make the guy take his time and take a dribble and you're fine if he goes flying by, but he's biting on every head fake and pump fake again like he did early in his Bucks tenure. I do think your point about Bud and Bobby though is a very good one. Um, I would like to see Doc really get into him on the defensive end and explain to him, like, if you think back, we've gone to this Bobby post up so much more the last, I think it started last year, but this year especially. But that championship year, he shot open threes. Like, that was what he did on offense. He just shot open threes. And he would maybe take like a couple dribbles into a floater when people were closing out hard. We were not running offense for Bobby very often. He was just a product of the offense, moving the ball, getting an open shot, and then he made them. That's the type of guy that can help a playoff team, not the guy who has a usage that's as high as anybody on the team other than Giannis when he's on the court and doesn't score at an efficient rate and takes some of the least efficient shots in basketball while not playing defense, while not getting back in transition. I don't know. Him, I just have very little hope for. I think for Pat, it's more about one, he's got to stay healthy and probably, hopefully, I think he's been battling stuff all year, which isn't helping things. But two, he needs to not be concussed because that man gets hit in the face every single game at least once. So we'll see if he even makes it. There's a pretty good chance Pat won't be healthy by the time the playoffs come around. But I mean, to me, he can be that guy. We've seen him be that guy. It's just going to be a matter of staying more disciplined. I think having the whole defense in, like, if you think back to the championship year, the defense was just on a string. And I think he plays better in that type of a setting. This, the defense that he was playing under Griffin encourages him to be sprinting around and jumping around and doing all that stuff. And I think it got him back into some of his bad habits that he used to have. Whereas when he was with Buddy, it kind of learned, like, you weren't seeing him. He would probably short close more than I wanted. Instead of like jumping, he was probably a little late or short on closing out, but he was getting there for a long period of time and actually contesting shots and okay if guys just made shots. And he has the athleticism to like jump late and block a shot. I just, he's got to get through screens. He's got to get better about that stuff. He's still a long ways from me feeling comfortable with him in a playoff series, but I do think personally I would be more. I think he's more likely to help in a playoff series than Bobby, unless we get some crazy good matchup that Bobby just fits super well against. And honestly, at this point, I don't even know who that would be. So, what are your thoughts on those two potentially getting some playoff minutes?
Yeah. Well, that's going to lead us into, I'll just go to this last question that we got is, can this roster win a championship this season? And those guys will obviously be huge for us. I think it's funny that you mentioned Pat's athleticism, and maybe that was a joke that he hasn't dunked once this year. I honestly believe that. Like, I don't, if they were their
It'd
rim
be
grazers,
close.
yeah, like it was crazy, but it might have been a joke. So I apologize, Pat. That was a joke. But I think to that point, though, I think we need to play more athletes in general. Like that is something that we do severely lack. And Pat Beverley's 35. Like I hope that he can bring that type of energy and athleticism for 20 minutes or whatever he'll bring, hopefully at most. But in the playoffs, who knows? He could be unraveled at that point. But um, we just need guys who can kind of just play like a chicken with their head cut off sometimes. I think when Bud first, or not Bud, when Doc first kind of got here, I think that was a big thing of like, I might have heard that in the broadcast too, of like, we need to like get out and run an offense again. Like you got to push it and like actually start moving down the court with Giannis and with those guys. That's kind of when that first game, I know you probably didn't watch those first couple of games, but I did notice that right away too. Like guys were running. It's just we are an older roster, and if you don't play athletes, that's cool for the first game, but it's going to get tiring after a while. They're not going to be able to do it. Like you got to play Andre, you got to play even AJ. I mean, AJ can run. He's a super good athlete, as we've seen. So I think those guys, and Doc mentioned it, like one of them, and now it's going to ring true now. Like we thought maybe a roster change is going to happen. It really didn't. So one of those guys is for sure going to have to help us now, it seems like. So hopefully we get these last 30-ish games, whatever it is, to figure out which one of those young guys it's going to be. But good news is I think they're all athletes. I don't think Marjan's unfortunately going to crack the rotation anytime soon. So it's probably between those two guys, but they are athletes and they can run. So I think that helps. But one, just in general, I think it's going to come down to the same thing. I think we can't really lose focus of what we needed in the playoffs, especially what we didn't have last year of half court offense. We have Giannis and Dame now. So I think that's probably going to get solved. And that was our biggest thing, whole different roster, whole different problem at that point, but we do have to solve that. That was why we got Dame. I think that's a check mark. And then obviously the defense is going to be the biggest question of the type of adjustments that we can make. We haven't seen Doc in that setting, but it'll come down to that too. And then I think, yeah, I mean, I'll segue way into you to this point that we both kind of talked about before the podcast. I know this is kind of a point you had that you wanted to bring up, but as bad as it seems right now, Bucks fans, I think a lot of us kind of forget what it felt like sometimes in that 2021 season, even right before we got PJ, even right, I've mentioned this a couple times either to you or even on the podcast again of when we got PJ, I think we were actually like a net negative when he was on the floor we first got him at the very least. Like it wasn't super smooth with PJ Tucker. Like it was kind of like a clunky feeling like we were doing decent stuff and we just kind of weren't winning a ton of games. Like we obviously had a good record, but it just kind of felt the same of kind of how it feels right now of we're just kind of like getting by, but we're kind of building good habits and we're just kind of trying stuff. And hopefully that's kind of the same vibe that, you know, will kind of lead us into the playoffs again. But um, I forgot to do this rant too. It kind of alludes to it, but I think the national media right now wants to talk about first our record was too good, but we suck, which I actually kind of agreed with. I agree with that point. But now our record sucks with Doc, and that's Bible. That's we suck now because we have a bad record. Um, but we're doing good things. So like outside of tonight, I guess wasn't a great example, but we're missing two of our stars, so whatever. But I think we're building good habits right now, so I don't want to get caught up too on the record. But I think that's a good point. Like I said, I kind of stole a lot of the points there. But um, how did you kind of perceive that 2021 season, and how does it kind of to you? How does that relate to this season, and kind of maybe we had the same type of magic kind of brewing?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that was exactly what I was going to talk about. I think if you, as a Bucks fan, can look back at the Bud era and what season you felt the worst about in the season during the regular season, I can't imagine any of you would say that it wasn't the 2021 season. There was one, Drew had come in and they got off to a really good start. Obviously, I think they won the first seven or eight or whatever it was. But in the middle of like January, they had a bad run. They were kind of limping into that deadline. I think a lot of people were kind of hoping for a somewhat bigger upgrade of some sort in the same way that we were this year. I think a lot of people were happy with PJ. I was happy with PJ. I think you went back and forth a couple times on PJ during that regular season, but like it was understandable because, like you said, they weren't looking great with him. And then he got hurt, and then he was kind of battling back through injury, and things just weren't looking that great. And I think we had an okay finish to that season, if I remember right. But then, I mean, even thinking down 2-0 to the Nets, I mean, Bud was about to get fired. Like it was about to happen. That season had a lot of points where you felt like it was probably over. and or at least you had very, very little confidence in the team. And that was the year they won. And the years that they went into it with a 70 win pace before the bubble and the year that they had a 2-0 lead on the Raptors, like those years you felt good the entire time. You felt good last year pretty much the entire time. I mean, I felt really good going into the playoffs last year, and it didn't work out at all. So I think to me, I did see a lot of people, and it's hard not to have that immediate reaction where it's like we're not winning with this. The Bucks have Damian Lillard and Giannis. They also have Chris Middleton and Brook. Those are four players that every team they would start for every single team. Giannis and Dame would probably be the best player on 20 of the teams in the NBA. Giannis maybe all 30. That team is capable of winning a championship. Now, whether it's super likely or not, I don't know. I think you're going to need to see improvements. I will say I just saw that we didn't watch that whole fourth quarter of the T-Wolves game, but AJ appears to have had a really good fourth because he had 27 points and seven made threes. So I kind of feel like he's earning himself a role that Griffin, not anymore. That Doc is going to, I think Doc is starting to trust him a lot. And I hope he keeps getting opportunities to play like 20 plus minutes because I think at some point it's possible he could be a guy who his shooting, he comes into a game in a playoff game. We saw Duncan Robinson did this to us. Duncan just held his own on defense and then just made 7 threes in a game. And that was an incredible boost to that team. AJ Green is capable of doing that type of having that type of impact. And I think honestly, his emergence since Doc took over is one of the biggest reasons I actually am started. I have a little bit more hope than I thought I would. Um, I really think he can be a player for the Bucks, and I hope that we're able to kind of continue on with AJ as a Buck moving forward because to me he's that perfect role player like type where I think he could legitimately be like a 50% 3-point shooter. Now he might take tougher threes throughout the course of the season than a guy who shoots 50% would, so maybe you see him more in like the mid 40s. I think he's that good of a shooter though that he's one of the better shooters in basketball. Have seen him drive to the hoop, score. I've seen him make some pretty solid passes. His handle's fine. And I really do think he knows what he's doing on defense. He's not the best like lateral mover, but he puts his hands up. He gets his body into guys. He doesn't foul that much. I think he's a guy who's going to help. And I would like what you talked about, an emergence of Ajax or Marjan under Doc would really, really go a long ways towards really helping me feel better about this. We saw AJ earned minutes quickly. Like, I don't think Doc trusts young players automatically, but I do think if you show him what you can do, I think you might start getting some more opportunities. And hopefully Ajax will get that after tonight because I don't think he was great tonight, but he showed the flashes that we've seen at other times too, where he's just in a good spot. He's doing a lot of uh, smart things on the court. So I think you're going to need the young guys to really like at least one of them, probably closer to two of them to step up. But I'm not ruling out a championship with that core four guys. Like that team talent wise, because sorry, now I'm rambling, but like you got to remember in the playoffs that those guys are going to play most of the game. The bench becomes less important in the playoffs
Hmm.
because they're just not going to play them that much. And
Our
the guy,
championship year, we had 7 guys who got
yeah,
legit minutes if you don't even count Jeff Teague's little cup of tea in some of those
right.
games.
That was just to not have Drew Holiday pass out on the court. Like Jeff Teague was in there to not kill Drew. It a championship in takes an incredible grind where guys are just going to be dead at the end of the year. And if the Bucks are going to do it again, it's going to take that again. It's going to be 6 or 7, maybe 8 guys in the rotation. And if a guy like AJ can have games where he hits 5, 6 threes off the bench, like that could be huge. It's just that core four just gives me hope no matter what. I think you should have that hope given that that level of talent is not normal around the league. Um, it stacks up with any top four around the league. It's just a matter of what comes in behind and how much can you paper over the weaknesses of the guys behind them. So hopefully Beverley helps that. Would have loved to see more, but I'm not going to rule it out. Gunnar, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned AJ Green, and I think unfortunately I didn't want to be in a position where I had to rely on a rookie in the playoffs, and we don't necessarily have to rely. We're just trying to, like you said, we're trying to figure out those 6, 7, 8 guys right now. It's a revolving door. But we were just kind of hoping more for a situation where we didn't have to rely on a rookie. But I think even I forgot who brought up Christian Braun's name from the Nuggets, and they related him to, I think, to Andre, and because I mean he was a rookie who won on the NBA Finals and he played legit minutes, but I think like you said, I think he actually matches up better with like an AJ Green because of that athlete, and I think he shoots better than Braun even did. So um, I just think I didn't want to be in a position where I relied on a rookie, but if we're there, we're there, and I just think I like those guys, so I think there's still a chance, but um, yeah, I mean that's pretty much all I got on that. I just
Yeah.
think. Unfortunately, yeah, this is the roster. I guess is how just to wrap it up. I think there is a window you can compare. We didn't talk about. We ended up already talking too long. That's why I didn't want to talk about the other moves because there really wasn't a ton of moves in the league. But Boston did make a couple kind of fringe moves, and the Sixers. I mean, Embiid, who knows if he's going to play this year? I hope he does because I mean, I don't want to win like that anyways. But and it's his career kind of has like a weird path anyways. But um, yeah, I mean, that's another team. And then the Cavs, I guess the Knicks made a couple moves. The Cavs didn't really do anything. So I mean, I think even after last year, we should probably learn the lesson of I don't think seedings matter a ton. Just kind of building good habits matters and whether we play Boston in the second round, it would be nice to say, "Oh, we made it to the Eastern Conference Finals. Yeah, we're all trying to win a championship." So I just don't care if we end up playing them in the second round. You got to beat them at some point. So if we're healthy, they're healthy. Let's just drop the gloves and let's just go at it. I don't really care what round it is. Um, but yeah, I think I just don't care about seeding, and I don't care about what they didn't make any moves that I'm like super scared about. So I just don't really care all that much about the other teams right now. I'm just kind of more in my own bubble trying to figure out um, if we can do the right stuff to win a championship. 'Cause I think we got enough in our team. I just a lot of question marks, and you just hope they can get kind of figured out.
Yeah. I will say the Xavier Tillman trade to the Celtics really annoyed me because I'm a big Xavier Tillman fan, and
Yeah.
I think he's a very, very good defender that's going to help them quite a bit. Um, but like you said, I mean, I think honestly, the Knicks have been killing it for a while. In terms of just the way they've been operating, from being a joke for so long, I think it's kind of been overlooked how many smart and good moves they've made the last few years without really moving any firsts. They have a ton of first round picks saved up too. Um, I do have to touch on because I'm talking about them. I do find it funny how everybody's ripping on the Bucks for the Dante thing now when the Kings let him go immediately and the Warriors didn't try to re-sign him. We're not the only team. It's not the only
Hey,
team.
I ripped on Dante immediately, so that's I'm not in that group.
No, I mean it's just like it is funny to me that the Bucks are the ones like we're three teams removed from being
Hmm.
the team with Dante. Um, but I, like I said, I think the Bucks stack up at the top of their roster as well as anybody. It's just going to be some guys stepping up, and that's what we saw in that season. Like it doesn't have to be every game too. Like we saw Jeff Teague even in that game 6 against the Hawks when he suddenly started making shots, and those were big shots. And Bobby did step up in a few big moments, but he wasn't important to the team in those other moments where they could just sit him. That's, I think, the way you got to. I mean, Pat was our best shooter in the finals. Guy was just nailing open threes that whole run in the finals. And that's all it takes is you can even look at Bryn Forbes in round one. Bryn Forbes went off in round one. Like that helped us sweep a Heat team that was a tough series for us, but we were able to just get through it in four because of a guy like Bryn Forbes having a big series. Like it's going to take at each step, you need some guys to step up. It's probably not going to be, I'm not relying on any of those guys outside of the top four and hoping that they're going to be there every game. But if Doc can mix and match them correctly, I could still see it happening. So, um, yeah, you got anything else you want to talk about here with these trades or anything else? All right. Well, why don't you give me your random buck then?
Yeah, I thought it was on par here with maybe the buyout market, and we obviously got this guy via buyout, but um, and we don't think we're going to pick somebody up via buyout. But one of the best case scenarios for this type of season now that we're entering was when we got Marvin Williams, and that season was ruined. We already know why it was ruined and everything like that. I'm not going to make excuses, but really, he was. If I can get him right now, I'd take him. Did I say it was Marvin Williams? I feel like I've already talked, but
Yep.
okay. So we did. It was Marvin Williams. Um, And yeah, he just kind of did a little bit of everything for us. And like I said, if we could pick him up right now, I would definitely take him. And I think you sent me a tweet today that it was more for coping. You said obviously, and that's what kind of the joke of it was. But a lot of like these moves and stuff don't necessarily end up working even in best case scenarios all the time. Like it does, just because you didn't make a trade today or you didn't pick up a guy that you wanted to buy out doesn't mean you don't win the championship. Like a lot of those moves don't even work out. So. Um, I think Marvin in a perfect world with no COVID and stuff, I think that actually would have been one of the better moves of really all time of like buyouts 'cause to pick up that valuable of a guy that was super huge for us. So, yeah, it was kind of the what if that season. Unfortunately, it kind of felt like that was our year. We were just playing insane basketball, and then we were able to add him to the mix too. So, um, yeah, kind of left with a little bit of what could have been with Marvin Williams. But yeah, what do you got?
Yeah. Well, I was definitely very excited when we brought in Marvin Williams. And like you said, I think it would have worked out a lot better in regular circumstances, but it didn't, and there weren't. So whatever. Um, my guy also came from the Hornets to the Bucks at one point during the middle of a season. So I'm tying these together somehow. Um, Ramon Sessions. He was obviously just a second round pick by the Bucks originally from the
Ramon, what is going on here?
That's why I changed it right away. Um, Ramon Sessions. No, but he was kind I just remember like he was not that great of a 3-point shooter, but I remember one big like corner three that he hit, and I want to say it was his rookie year to like tie a game and send it to OT or something. He really, really good like just playmaker. I enjoyed watching him in like a pick and roll. He moved the ball really well. Like I said, not much of a shooter, but he shot okay for his career, just on really low volume from three. Had seasons where it was like 40% on 1.5 a game and other seasons where it was like 16% on one a game. So it was it was a make or miss situation for him for a lot. But the guy averaged over 10 a game for his career. And assist wise, it was like four, but when he was really running things in Milwaukee, it was 7.5, 5.7. And then, like I said, the Bucks brought him back in what was Giannis's rookie year. Um, that was a Luke Ridnour trade, right? And Jeff Adrian. Adrian and Ramon came
Mhm.
together. So two of my guys I've used for this came in the same trade. Um, but he actually did pretty well for the Bucks in that stint too. Like the play I remember is actually Giannis against the Jazz having a fast break and throwing a behind the back pass to Sessions for a layup. And that was Giannis's rookie year. And it was one of those like, okay, like a little skinny 6'9" guy is running the floor and making behind the back passes on the move. And um, I remember he's always just been a guy that I think a lot of teams respected as like a vet towards the end of his career too. Like he kind of kept getting chances, even as the play was falling off a little bit to be a bench guy. But I was a big Ramon Sessions guy, and honestly, his career numbers are even better than I would have guessed. Now that I was looking at them now,
He's younger than PJ Tucker right now, by the
that's
way. I
insane.
just saw that. But yeah, he averaged 16 and 5 that season, so he averaged more points than we won games that year. So yeah, no, that was a super underrated season. I just remember all of his assists. Does he have like the single game assist record? Doesn't he still have that?
I want to
Or
say
as a
I
rookie
think
at
he
the
had a
very
20
least?
assist game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to find that, but I couldn't find like his career highs or anything. But um, no, he was. I enjoyed Ramon Sessions, and I think that he's probably a guy that doesn't get talked about as enough for like the solid seasons he gave the Bucks. Now, I was too young to remember if he played any sort of defense or was capable at all of playing defense. But I liked watching him on offense. So yeah, those are our random Bucks, and thank you guys for listening. Please make sure to like and subscribe on whatever platform you're on. Remember to follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod. And as always, please feel free to leave us feedback on how we can get better. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next time.
Go Bucks.